At a glamorous party hosted by billionaire Maximilian Hart, a mysterious stranger steps into the spotlight. The woman looks out of place among the elite, her presence drawing whispers and curious stares. She approaches Maximilian, and what she reveals leaves him and everyone around him utterly stunned. This revelation is about to unravel secrets from the past, change lives, and challenge everything Maximilian thought he knew. Maximilian Hart's mansion was alive with music, laughter, and the tink. The lavish ballroom, adorned with crystal chandeliers and vibrant floral arrangements, was filled with the city's elite, investors, socialites, and a scattering of celebrities, all eager to be part of the exclusive gathering hosted by the enigmatic billionaire. Maximilian himself stood near the center of the room, effortlessly charming his guests with his confident smile and cool demeanor. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, Maximilian looked every bit the powerful businessman he was. He moved through the crowd with ease, exchanging handshakes, offering smiles, and making sure everyone felt his presence. He had worked hard to build his empire, and nights like this were a chance to celebrate his success with those who mattered in his world. But even amidst the glittering laughter and sparkling champagne, there was a part of him that felt a sense of detachment, a part that wondered if this was truly what happiness looked like. As he made his way across the ballroom, a server approached with a tray of champagne, and Maximilian took a glass, his eyes scanning the room. It was then that he noticed her, a woman standing near the entrance, her eyes searching the crowd. She was dressed simply, in stark contrast to the opulence around her. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her gaze seemed determined, as if she had come with a purpose. Maximilian's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched her. She didn't fit in with the usual crowd that frequented his parties. There was something different about her, something that drew his attention. Before he could dwell on it further, he was pulled back into a conversation by one of his investors, the stranger slipping from his mind for the moment. The night continued, the music growing louder, the laughter more jubilant. Maximilian was engaged in a conversation with a small group of guests when the woman appeared again, this time closer. She seemed hesitant but determined, her eyes locking onto his across the room. She began to walk towards him, her presence cutting through the crowd as if she had a singular purpose. One of Maximilian's guests, noticing his distracted gaze, turned to see what had captured his attention. "Who is that?" the guest asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Maximilian shook his head slightly, his eyes not leaving the woman as she approached. "I'm not sure," he replied, his voice low. There was something in her expression, something serious, almost desperate, that made him uneasy. As she drew closer, the noise of the party seemed to fade into the background. The woman finally stopped in front of Maximilian, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that whatever she was about to say would change everything. "Mr. Hart?" she began, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed a hint of vulnerability. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with you. It's about your father." Maximilian felt his breath catch in his throat. His father. It was a topic he rarely discussed, a part of his life that he had tried to leave behind. His gaze hardened slightly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice controlled, though there was a hint of warning in his tone. "But this isn't the time or place to discuss my father." The woman didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Please, Mr. Hart, you need to hear this. It's important. It's about something he left behind, something you need to know." The room around them seemed to hold its breath, the laughter and conversation fading as those nearby sensed the tension between them. Maximilian could feel the curious stares of his guests, the weight of their eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. He looked at the woman, his mind racing. There was something about her, something in the way she looked at him, the sincerity in her voice, that made him pause. Against his better judgment, he nodded slightly, gesturing towards a side door that led to a quieter part of the mansion. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "We can talk, but make it quick." He turned, leading her towards the door, the eyes of the crowd following them as they moved. Emily, who had been standing nearby watching the interaction with concern, stepped forward. "Max, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Maximilian gave her a reassuring smile, though his eyes betrayed his unease. "It's fine, Emily. I'll just be a moment." With that, he opened the door, leading the woman into a small sitting room away from the party. The door closed behind them, muffling the noise of the celebration, and Maximilian turned to face her, his eyes filled with questions. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "You have my attention. Now tell me, who are you, and what does this have to do with my father?" The woman took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "My name is Anna," she said, "and I'm here because of something your father left behind. A secret that he kept from everyone, including you." Maximilian felt his heart begin to race, a sense of unease settling in his chest. His father had been a complicated man, someone with secrets, someone who had made choices that Maximilian had struggled to understand. But what could this woman possibly know that he didn't? He crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze unwavering. "What kind of secret?" he asked, his voice tense. Anna hesitated for a moment as if gathering her courage. Then she spoke, her words clear, her eyes locked onto his. "It's about a family, one that your father supported in secret for years. A family that he cared for, one that no one knew about. And I'm a part of that family." Maximilian felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. A secret family. His father had never been the type to show emotion, to care for anyone beyond his own interests. And yet, here was this woman, standing before him, claiming to be connected to him in a way he had never imagined. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would my father keep something like this a secret?" Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "He had his reasons," she said. "But I'm here now because I believe you need to know the truth. It's time for the secrets to end, Mr. Hart. It's time for you to know who your father really was." Maximilian stood there, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent his life trying to build something, trying to create a legacy that was his own. But now, with this revelation, everything he thought he knew about his family, about his past, was suddenly in question. He looked at Anna, his eyes searching hers for answers, and as he stood there, the weight of the past pressing down on him, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, whatever secrets were about to be revealed, his life would never be the same again. Maximilian Hart felt the weight of the revelation hang in the air, the room filled with a silence that seemed to press against his chest. He stared at Anna, his mind a chaotic mix of questions, disbelief, and confusion. His father, a man he had always known to be cold, distant, and fiercely independent, had supported a secret family. The thought seemed impossible, yet the earnest look in Anna's eyes made him pause. "Start from the beginning," Maximilian said, his voice low, barely concealing the tension beneath his calm demeanor. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Who exactly are you, and what do you mean by a secret family?" Anna took a deep breath, her gaze not wavering from his. There was a hint of vulnerability in her expression, but her resolve remained firm. She knew she had to tell him the truth, no matter how difficult it was. "My mother," she began, her voice steady, "was involved with your father many years ago. It wasn't something anyone knew about, and for reasons I still don't completely understand, it remained hidden. Your father provided for us, financially and in other ways, until the day he passed." Maximilian blinked, the words cutting into him like a knife. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, mixing with a deep sense of betrayal. He had spent years trying to make sense of his father's actions, his coldness, his detachment. Now, with this stranger in front of him, everything he thought he knew about the man was unraveling. "Why now?" Maximilian asked, his voice tense. "Why come to me with this now after all this time?" Anna hesitated for a moment, her eyes reflecting the complexity of her emotions. "Because I had no choice," she said. "After your father passed away, things changed for us. The support he provided, it disappeared. And now, my mother is sick, and I'm running out of options. I didn't want to come here and disrupt your life, but I need your help. I thought you deserved to know." Maximilian's eyes darkened as he listened to her. He felt an inner conflict pulling him in two directions. On one side, his instinct to protect himself, to shut down and refuse to acknowledge any of this. But on the other side was a part of him that couldn't deny the pain in Anna's voice, the vulnerability that mirrored a part of himself he had always tried to ignore. "You think coming here, dropping this on me, and asking for my help is fair?" he said, his voice barely containing his frustration. "You expect me to believe that everything my father did, everything I thought I knew, was a lie?" Anna looked down for a moment, her shoulders sagging slightly. She seemed to understand the weight of her request, the way it was impacting him. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. "I know it's not fair," she whispered, "but I also know that my mother doesn't deserve to suffer because of choices that weren't hers to make. And I believe that you're not like him. You're not cold or detached. You care about people. You can make a difference." Maximilian felt his heart clench at her words. He had spent so much of his life trying to be different from his father, trying to build a life that was his own, a life that was more than just power and money. And now, here was this woman, a stranger, looking at him as if he was the only one who could make things right. It was a burden he didn't know if he could carry, but it was also something he couldn't turn away from. After a long pause, Maximilian let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I don't know if I can help you," he said honestly, his voice softening. "I don't even know where to begin with this, but I'll listen. I'll hear you out." Anna's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That's all I ask." The days that followed were a whirlwind of revelations and emotions. Maximilian had invited Anna to stay at the mansion temporarily, while they figured out how to move forward. He wasn't entirely sure why he had done it. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the small, quiet voice in his heart telling him that this was the right thing to do. Emily, who had witnessed the entire encounter at the party, stood by Maximilian's side, offering him her unwavering support. She could see how deeply the revelation had affected him, the way it had shaken his understanding of his past and of the man his father had been. One evening, after Anna had settled into one of the guest rooms, Maximilian sat in the study with Emily. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow over the room, but the warmth did little to ease the tension in his chest. He stared at the flames, his thoughts heavy, his emotions conflicted. "Do you think I made the right decision?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with compassion. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "I think you made the only decision you could have made, Max," she said gently. "You're a good man. You couldn't just turn her away, not when she needed you." Maximilian closed his eyes for a moment, a sigh escaping his lips. "I just don't know what to believe anymore," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Everything I thought I knew about my father, it's all in question now. And I don't know how to make sense of it." Emily squeezed his hand gently, her voice filled with warmth. "Maybe you don't have to make sense of it all at once," she said. "Maybe it's okay to take it one step at a time. You're not alone, Max. You have me and you have Leo. We're in this together." Maximilian looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Emily," he said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over. "You'll never have to find out," she said. "We're a family, and we'll face this together." As the days turned into weeks, Maximilian began to learn more about Anna's story. She spoke of her mother, a woman who had loved Maximilian's father despite the secrecy, despite the sacrifices. She spoke of the financial support that had kept them afloat, and how after his father's death they had been left with nothing. She spoke of her mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, and her desperate need for help. Maximilian listened, his heart heavy with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the choices his father had made, but he could do something now. He could help Anna and her mother. He could make sure that they were taken care of. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Anna looked at Maximilian, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said softly. "And I know I'm asking for a lot. But I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for us. My mother, she always spoke of your father as a good man. And I think, in his own way, he tried to be. But you're better than that. You're doing what's right, even when it's hard." Maximilian felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know if I'm better," he said honestly. "But I'm trying. I'm trying to do what's right." Anna smiled, her eyes misting over. "That's all anyone can ask for," she said. "Thank you, Maximilian, for everything." One evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Maximilian stood on the balcony looking out over the grounds. The garden below was bathed in a golden glow, and he could hear the distant laughter of Leo playing with Emily. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still questions to answer, still wounds that needed healing. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had Emily, Leo, and now Anna, people who mattered, people who needed him, and people who had shown him that love, family, and doing the right thing were what truly mattered. Maximilian turned, looking back into the mansion, his heart filled with determination. He would face whatever came next, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do, and in that moment, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges, with growth, and with the promise of a better future for them all. As the weeks continued, Maximilian found himself increasingly involved in Anna and her mother's lives. He arranged for the best medical care for Anna's mother, ensuring that she had everything she needed. He made space for Anna in his home, trying to make her feel comfortable despite the strange circumstances that had brought her to his doorstep. It was a delicate balance, managing his emotions, the mansion's dynamics, and the growing curiosity of his circle of friends, all while trying to come to terms with what his father had hidden from him for so many years. It was one afternoon, while Maximilian was working in his study, that Emily entered, her face unusually serious. She carried an envelope, her fingers gripping the edges with a nervous energy that Maximilian recognized instantly. "Max," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "This came in today. It's from one of your father's old legal advisors. It's addressed to you, but I think it might have something to do with Anna." Maximilian's heart sank. He set aside the paperwork on his desk, taking the envelope from her. His fingers traced the edges of the paper, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be inside. He looked up at Emily, her eyes filled with concern, and he knew that whatever was in this envelope could change everything. With a deep breath, he opened it, his eyes scanning the typed letter. As he read, his expression shifted: confusion, disbelief, and then a growing sense of anger. "Max, what is it?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Maximilian set the letter down, his eyes locking onto hers. "It's a trust," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "My father set up a trust for Anna and her mother. He kept it hidden, even from me. But after his death, the funds were supposed to be released, except they never were." Emily frowned, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean they were never released?" Maximilian clenched his jaw, the realization cutting into him. Someone stopped it. Someone interfered with the process. All this time, Anna's mother should have had the support my father intended for her, but someone made sure she didn't get it. Emily's eyes widened, her expression shifting to one of disbelief. Who would do that? And why? Maximilian shook his head, his mind racing. He knew his father had been a man of secrets, but this was something different. This was a deliberate attempt to prevent his father's wishes from being fulfilled. It was a betrayal, not just to Anna and her mother, but to him as well. I don't know, he said, his voice filled with determination. But I'm going to find out. Whoever did this, they didn't just hurt Anna and her mother. They tried to erase a part of my father's legacy, a part that he clearly cared about. And I won't let that stand. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Maximilian threw himself into uncovering the truth, working tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of who had interfered with the trust. He reached out to old contacts, made calls to his father's former associates, and even hired a private investigator to help him dig deeper. Emily stood by his side through it all, offering her support and helping in any way she could. She could see the toll it was taking on him. The late nights, the frustration, the way his eyes grew darker with each passing day as he uncovered more secrets. But she also knew that this was something he needed to do. It was about more than just the money. It was about righting a wrong, about doing what his father had intended, and about protecting the people who had been hurt. One evening, as Maximilian sat in his study, surrounded by documents and notes, there was a knock on the door. He looked up, his eyes weary, and saw Anna standing in the doorway. Her expression was hesitant, her eyes filled with both gratitude and concern. Maximilian, she said softly, stepping into the room. I just wanted to thank you for everything you're doing. You didn't have to help us, and yet you have. I don't know how to repay you. Maximilian shook his head, his eyes meeting hers. You don't need to thank me, Anna. This isn't just about you and your mother. It's about my father, about the choices he made, and it's about making things right. Anna nodded, her eyes misting over. She took a step closer, her voice trembling slightly. I know that finding out about all of this hasn't been easy for you. I can see how much it's affected you. But I want you to know that my mother always spoke of your father with love. She always said that despite everything, he was a good man. And I think in his own way, he was trying to do the right thing. Maximilian felt a lump form in his throat. He looked down at the documents on his desk, the evidence of secrets and betrayals that had been hidden for so long. He had spent so much of his life trying to be different from his father, trying to carve out his own path. But now, as he stood there, he realized that perhaps his father had been more complex than he had ever understood, capable of both great mistakes and great love. I hope you're right, Anna, he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. I hope that, in the end, he was trying to do the right thing. Anna smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. I think he was. And I think you're doing the right thing now. For him, for my mother, and for yourself. Maximilian nodded, his heart swelling with determination. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there were still questions to answer, still battles to fight. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had Emily, Leo, and now Anna, people who believed in him, who stood by his side, and who had shown him that love, family, and doing what was right were the things that truly mattered. The breakthrough came late one night, when Maximilian received a call from the private investigator. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words sent a shock through him. Mr. Hart, I found something. It appears that the person who interfered with the trust was someone close to your father, a business associate named Gerald Shaw. Maximilian's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the phone. Gerald Shaw. He knew the name well, a man who had been a close confidant of his father, someone who had been involved in the family business for years. The thought that Gerald could have betrayed his father, could have deliberately hurt Anna and her mother, filled Maximilian with a mix of anger and determination. Thank you, he said, his voice steady. Send me everything you have. I'll take it from here. He hung up the phone, his mind racing. Gerald Shaw had always been a figure in the background of his life, someone he had never questioned, someone he had trusted because his father had trusted him. But now, with the truth coming to light, Maximilian knew that he couldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. He looked at Emily, who had been sitting nearby, her eyes filled with concern. "It was Gerald Shaw," he said, his voice tight with anger. "He's the one who stopped the trust. He's the one who tried to erase everything my father did for Anna and her mother." Emily's eyes widened, her expression shifting to one of disbelief. Gerald? But why? What could he possibly gain from doing something like that? Maximilian shook his head, his jaw clenched. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out, and I'm going to make sure that he faces the consequences of what he's done." The next day, Maximilian arranged a meeting with Gerald Shaw. He invited him to the mansion, under the pretense of discussing business. As Gerald entered the grand foyer, his expression was one of confidence, unaware of what awaited him. Maximilian stood in the sitting room, his eyes cold as he watched Gerald approach. He gestured for him to sit, his demeanor calm, but there was an underlying tension that filled the room. "Gerald," Maximilian began, his voice steady, "I've recently come across some information that concerns my father's affairs, specifically a trust that he set up for a family, Anna's family." Gerald's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He forced a smile, leaning back in his, "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Max. Your father had many business dealings." "Don't lie to me," Maximilian interrupted, his voice sharp, his eyes narrowing. "I know it was you, Gerald. You stopped the trust from being released. You betrayed my father's wishes and you hurt people in the process." Gerald's face turned pale, the confidence draining from his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but Maximilian didn't give him a chance. "You had no right," Maximilian continued, his voice filled with controlled fury. "My father may have had his faults, but he tried to do something good for them. And you took that away. For what? Money? Power? I don't care what your reasons were. What you did was wrong, and now you're going to face the consequences." Gerald's eyes widened, his face a mask of fear. He stammered, "Max, please, I can explain." Maximilian shook his head, his expression cold. "I don't want your excuses, Gerald. I want you out of my life, out of my business, and I want you to make things right with Anna and her mother. You will return what you took, and you will face whatever legal consequences come your way." Gerald swallowed hard, his face ashen. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand." Maximilian watched as Gerald left, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had confronted the man who had betrayed his father, who had hurt the people his father had tried to protect. And as he stood there, the weight of everything settling over him, he felt a sense of resolution. He turned, seeing Emily standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with pride and love. She walked over to him, wrapping her arms around him, and he held her close, his heart swelling with emotion. "You did the right thing, Max," she whispered. "You made things right." Maximilian nodded, his eyes misting over. "It's not over yet," he said softly, "but it's a start. And I'll keep fighting, for Anna, for her mother, and for us, because that's what my father would have wanted." And in that moment, Maximilian knew that he had reached a turning point, not just in his fight for justice, but in his understanding of himself, his father, and what it meant to truly do what was right. The journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he was not alone, and that together they could overcome anything. The weeks following Gerald Shaw's departure were a period of both recovery and transformation for Maximilian, Emily, Anna, and Leo. The tension that had once filled the mansion slowly gave way to a sense of calm, a sense that despite the challenges they had faced, they were stronger for it. The trust fund that Gerald had withheld was finally released, and Anna's mother received the financial support she so desperately needed. It was a small victory, but for Maximilian it was the first step in righting the wrongs of the past. Maximilian was a man used to control, to making decisions with precision and confidence. But the past few months had taught him something new, something that had nothing to do with power or wealth. It was about love, resilience, and the importance of connection. He had opened his home and his heart to people he had once considered strangers, and in doing so, he had found a sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had ever known. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden, Maximilian sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree. Leo was toddling around on the grass, chasing after a butterfly, his laughter echoing through the garden. Emily sat beside Maximilian, her hand resting on his knee, her eyes filled with warmth as she watched their son play. Anna joined them, a soft smile on her face as she approached. She sat down on the other side of Maximilian, her gaze shifting from Leo to the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maximilian looked at her, his eyes filled with empathy. He had come to care for Anna as if she were part of his family, and he could see the toll that the past had taken on her. She had lost so much, yet she had faced every challenge with courage, and he admired her for that. "It's peaceful," he agreed, his voice gentle. "And you're welcome here as long as you need. This is your home now, too." Anna smiled, her eyes misting over. "Thank you, Maximilian," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You've done more for me and my mother than I could have ever asked for. I don't know how to repay you." Maximilian shook his head, his gaze softening. "You don't need to repay me, Anna. You and your mother deserved better, and I'm just glad I could help. Besides," he added, glancing at Leo, who was now attempting to climb onto a low branch of the oak tree, "this little one seems to think of you as part of the family already." Anna laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to lift some of the weight off her shoulders. She looked at Leo, her eyes filled with affection. "He's an incredible little boy," she said. "You and Emily are wonderful parents." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She reached out, taking Maximilian's hand in hers, and looked at Anna. "We're just doing our best. And having you here, it's made a difference for all of us." As the days turned into weeks, a new normal began to settle over the Hart mansion. Anna's mother was moved into a comfortable home nearby where she received the best care available. Maximilian made sure that she was well taken care of, visiting her often with Anna and even taking Leo along, much to the elderly woman's delight. For the first time in a long time, Maximilian felt at peace. The heavy burden of secrets and betrayal had been lifted, and in its place there was a sense of connection and growth. He had learned to let go of the control he had always clung to, allowing himself to be vulnerable, to rely on others, and to open his heart to the people around him. One afternoon, as they gathered in the garden, Maximilian decided to do something he had been thinking about for a while. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with love, and then at Anna, whose gaze was filled with curiosity. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. He reached for Emily's hand, pulling her gently to her feet. "These past few months have been challenging for all of us, but they've also been some of the most meaningful of my life. And that's because of you, Emily." Emily's eyes widened, her heart fluttering as she looked at him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the love that shone there, and she felt her own eyes misting over. "Max," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He got down on one knee, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a beautiful ring, a symbol of everything they had built together, of the love that had grown between them. "Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you are my partner, my love, and my best friend. You have stood by me through everything, and you have shown me what it means to truly care for someone. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building our family, creating memories, and facing whatever comes our way. Will you marry me?" Emily felt her heart swell, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at the man she loved. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. "Yes, Maximilian. Yes, I will marry you." Maximilian smiled, his own eyes misting over as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He stood, pulling her into his arms, holding her close as Leo ran over, his eyes wide with excitement, though he didn't fully understand what had just happened. Anna clapped her hands, her eyes filled with joy as she watched the scene before her. "Congratulations," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You two deserve all the happiness in the world." Maximilian pulled back, looking at Emily, his heart overflowing with love. He kissed her softly, then looked at Leo, who was tugging at his leg, clearly wanting to be part of the moment. "Come here, little one," Maximilian said, lifting Leo into his arms. He looked at Emily, then at Anna, his heart swelling with gratitude for the family that they had become. The following weeks were a flurry of preparations and celebrations. Emily and Maximilian decided to keep the wedding simple, a small ceremony in the garden beneath the old oak tree, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Anna stood by Emily's side as her maid of honor, her heart swelling with happiness for the couple who had welcomed her into their lives without hesitation. The day of the wedding was filled with laughter, love, and a sense of peace that seemed to settle over the entire mansion. As Maximilian stood beneath the oak tree watching Emily walk towards him, her smile radiant, her eyes filled with love, he felt a sense of completeness that he had never known before. Leo, dressed in a tiny suit, walked ahead of his mother, holding a small basket of flowers, his face filled with concentration as he tried to remember his part in the ceremony. Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling with love for the little boy who had changed his life in so many ways. As Emily reached him, Maximilian took her hands in his eyes locking onto hers. The officiant began to speak, but Maximilian barely heard the words. All he could see was Emily, the woman who had stood by him, who had loved him through everything and who had shown him what it meant to truly be part of a family. "I promise to love you," Maximilian said, his voice filled with emotion, "to stand by you, to cherish you, and to be your partner in all things. You are my heart, my home, and my everything." Emily smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise to love you," she said, her voice trembling, "to support you, to laugh with you, and to face every challenge with you. You are my love, my partner, and my best friend." The officiant smiled, his voice warm as he spoke. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Maximilian leaned in, his lips meeting Emily's in a gentle kiss, his heart filled with love and hope for the future. Leo clapped his hands, his face lighting up with joy, and the small gathering of friends and family cheered, their hearts swelling with happiness for the couple. As the sun set over the garden, casting a golden glow over the mansion, Maximilian, Emily, Leo, and Anna sat together beneath the old oak tree. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, the warmth of love, and the promise of a bright future. Maximilian looked at Emily, his heart full. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, and looked at Leo, who was sitting on Anna's lap, his eyes drooping with sleep. "We've come a long way," Maximilian said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "And I wouldn't trade any of it for the world." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with love. "Neither would I," she said. "This is our family, and it's perfect, just the way it is." Maximilian looked at Anna, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Anna, for coming into our lives, for trusting us, and for being part of our family." Anna smiled, her eyes misting over. "Thank you, Maximilian, for everything, for giving us a home, for giving us hope, and for showing us what true family means." And as they sat there beneath the old oak tree, watching the sun set over the garden, Maximilian knew that they had found something truly special. They had faced challenges, they had grown, and they had built a family that was filled with love, resilience, and hope. And in that moment, he knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, as a family, ready to face whatever the future held. Life had settled into a beautiful routine for Maximilian, Emily, Leo, and Anna. The mansion that once held only echoes of the past was now alive with laughter, the pitter-patter of little feet, and the warmth of a family united. But, as life often has its way, peace can sometimes be disrupted when you least expect it. It all began one evening when a letter arrived, this time addressed to Anna. She had been in the kitchen with Emily, preparing dinner while Leo played with his toy cars on the floor. The letter was hand-delivered and the envelope was marked with an unfamiliar seal. Anna opened it, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned the contents. The color drained from her face, and she sank into the nearest chair, her eyes wide with shock. Emily, noticing her reaction, immediately moved to her side, her eyes filled with concern. "Anna, what is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Anna swallowed, her gaze fixed on the letter as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. "It's from my uncle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's demanding that I give up the trust my mother received. He's threatening legal action, claiming that my father had no right to leave anything to us." Emily felt a surge of protectiveness wash over her heart clenching as she looked at her friend. Anna's uncle had always been an imposing figure in her life, someone who had tried to control her mother, who had always resented the relationship she had with Maximilian's father. And now it seemed he was trying to take away the one thing that had given them stability. Maximilian, who had been in his study, heard the commotion and quickly made his way to the kitchen. He saw the fear in Anna's eyes, the letter trembling in her hands, and his heart sank. He took the letter from her, scanning its contents, his expression growing darker with each word. "He's threatening you?" Maximilian asked, his voice filled with barely contained anger. Anna nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "He says that if I don't give up the trust, he'll take us to court. He's always resented my mother, always thought that we were undeserving of anything from my father." Maximilian clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He had promised to protect Anna and her mother, to ensure that they had the life they deserved. He had faced betrayal before, but this felt different. This was a direct threat to his family, to the people he cared about. "He won't succeed," Maximilian said, his voice firm. He looked at Emily, then at Anna, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll fight this. He has no right to take anything from you." Emily nodded, her expression filled with support. She placed her hand on Anna's shoulder, her voice gentle. "You're not alone in this, Anna. We'll stand by you no matter what." Anna wiped her tears, her heart swelling with gratitude. She looked at Maximilian, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you, Max. I don't know what I would do without you." Maximilian smiled, his eyes softening. "You're family, Anna, and family looks out for each other." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, documents, and preparations for the battle that lay ahead. Maximilian reached out to the best attorneys he knew, ensuring that Anna had the strongest representation possible. He was determined to protect her, to make sure that her uncle's threats were nothing more than empty words. Emily was by Anna's side through every step, offering her support and helping her prepare for what was to come. They knew that this fight wouldn't be easy, that there were risks involved, but they also knew that they couldn't back down. They had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let someone take away everything they had built. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room going over the legal documents, Leo toddled over, his eyes wide with curiosity. He climbed onto Maximilian's lap, looking at the papers in front of them. "Daddy, what's that?" Leo asked, his voice filled with innocence. Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling as he looked at his son. He put the papers aside, wrapping his arm around Leo. "It's just some grown-up stuff, little one," he said gently. "But don't worry, everything's going to be all right." Leo looked at Anna, his eyes filled with concern. He reached out, taking her hand in his tiny one. "Don't be sad, Auntie Anna," he said, his voice filled with the kind of pure love only a child could express. "Daddy and Mommy will make everything better." Anna felt her heart swell, tears welling in her eyes. She pulled Leo into her arms, holding him close. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're the sweetest boy in the whole world." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over as she watched the exchange. She looked at Maximilian, her heart swelling with pride and love for the man she had married. They had built something beautiful together, something worth fighting for. And she knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the air was filled with tension. Maximilian, Emily, and Anna sat in the courtroom, their attorneys beside them, ready to present their case. Anna's uncle sat on the opposite side, his expression cold and determined. He was a man used to getting his way, and he clearly believed that this would be no different. Maximilian watched as the proceedings began, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they had a strong case, that the trust had been set up legally, that Anna and her mother had every right to what they had received. But there was still a part of him that feared what could happen, that worried about the impact this fight would have on Anna. As the attorneys made their arguments, Anna's uncle spoke. His voice filled with venom as he tried to paint Anna's mother as someone undeserving, someone who had taken advantage of Maximilian's father. Maximilian felt his anger rising, his hands clenching into fists as he listened to the lies. But then it was their turn. Anna's attorney spoke with conviction, presenting evidence that the trust had been set up with full consent, that it had been Maximilian's father's wish to provide for Anna and her mother. He spoke of the relationship between them, of the love that had existed, and of the sacrifices that Anna's mother had made. Anna was called to testify, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. She spoke of her mother, of the love she had for Maximilian's father, of the years they had spent in the shadows, never asking for more than what was given to them. She spoke of the betrayal they had faced when the trust was withheld, and of the struggle they had endured. Maximilian watched her, his heart swelling with pride. She was strong, stronger than she knew, and she was fighting not just for herself, but for her mother, for the life they deserved. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. The decision was read, and Maximilian felt his breath catch in his throat. "The trust will remain intact," the judge said, his voice firm. "It is clear that it was the intention of Maximilian Hart Sr. to provide for Anna and her mother. The claims made by Mr. Shaw are unfounded. The court rules in favor of the defendant." A wave of relief washed over Maximilian, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy and gratitude. He looked at Anna, her eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth, her face breaking into a smile. Emily reached over, wrapping her arms around Anna, her voice filled with emotion. "We did it, Anna. You did it." Maximilian stood, his eyes locking onto Anna's uncle, whose face had turned ashen. He walked over to him, his voice low, filled with authority. "You lost, Gerald, and you're not going to hurt Anna or her mother ever again. If you come near them, if you threaten them, I will make sure you face the full force of the law. Do you understand?" Gerald looked at him, his expression a mix of anger and defeat. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." Maximilian turned away, his heart pounding as he walked back to Anna and Emily. He pulled Anna into his arms, holding her close, his voice filled with emotion. "You're safe now," he whispered. "He won't hurt you anymore." Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Max," she said, her voice trembling. "For everything." That evening, as they returned to the mansion, there was a sense of peace that settled over them, a sense that they had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. The garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Maximilian, Emily, Anna, and Leo sat together beneath the old oak tree, the weight of the day slowly lifting from their shoulders. Leo climbed onto Maximilian's lap, his eyes filled with curiosity. "Daddy, did we win?" he asked, his voice innocent. Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling with love for his son. He looked at Emily, then at Anna, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Yes, little one," he said softly. "We won. And do you know why?" Leo shook his head, his eyes wide. "Because we're a family," Maximilian said, his voice filled with warmth. "And when we stand together, there's nothing we can't face." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over as she looked at her husband, her heart swelling with love. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her voice filled with emotion. "We're stronger together, and we always will be." Anna looked at them, her heart swelling with gratitude and love for the family that had welcomed her in. She reached for Leo, pulling him into her arms, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you, all of you, for everything." And as they sat there beneath the old oak tree, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Maximilian knew that they had faced their greatest challenge yet, and they had come out stronger, closer, and more united than ever. They were a family, and nothing, not even the ghosts of the past, could ever take that away from them. The months that followed the court ruling felt like a new beginning for Maximilian, Emily, Anna, Leo, and even Anna's mother. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of solitude for Maximilian, had truly become a home, a place where love, laughter, and resilience lived. The weight of the past with all its secrets and betrayals had been lifted, and in its place was a sense of peace and connection that filled every corner of their lives. Maximilian had always prided himself on his independence, on his ability to handle whatever life threw his way. But the past year had taught him something far more important, that true strength wasn't about going it alone. It was about allowing others in, about leaning on those who loved you, and about building something meaningful together. He had grown not just as a man, but as a husband, a father, and a friend. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Maximilian found himself sitting in the garden beneath the old oak tree. Leo was playing nearby, his laughter echoing through the air as he chased after a butterfly, his tiny feet running through the grass. Anna was sitting beside him, her expression one of contentment as she watched Leo, her mother sitting nearby, smiling at her grandson. Emily walked over, carrying a tray with cups of tea, her eyes filled with warmth as she approached. She set the tray down on a small table, her gaze meeting Maximilian's, and she smiled. "I thought we could all use a break," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. Maximilian reached for her hand, pulling her gently to sit beside him. He looked around at the people gathered in the garden, Anna, her mother, Leo, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was what he had always longed for, though he hadn't known it for so many years. This was family. This was love. And it was more fulfilling than anything he had ever imagined. "You know," Maximilian said, his voice soft as he looked at Emily, "I used to think that success was all about power, about building something big, something that people would remember. But now, I think success is about moments like this, about the people you share your life with, the love you give and receive, and the memories you create together." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over as she looked at him. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you're right, Max. This is what really matters." Anna looked over at them, her heart swelling with emotion. She reached for her mother's hand, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "We've been through so much," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But we're here now, and we're together. That's all that matters." Anna's mother, her face lined with the years of struggle and love she had lived through, smiled at her daughter, her voice filled with warmth. "You're right, my dear. We've come a long way, and I couldn't be prouder of you." Leo, hearing the gentle voices of the adults, toddled over to where they were sitting, his eyes wide with curiosity. He climbed onto Maximilian's lap, looking up at him, his face lighting up with a smile. "Daddy, can we stay out here until the stars come out?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. Maximilian looked at Emily, then at Anna, and he smiled, his heart swelling with love for his family. He wrapped his arm around Leo, holding him close. "Of course we can, little one," he said softly. "We can stay here as long as you want." And so they sat together beneath the old oak tree, the sky above them growing darker, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the twilight. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, the warmth of the setting sun, and the love that bound them all together. The following weeks were filled with simple joys, moments that might have seemed ordinary to others but were extraordinary to them. They celebrated Leo's birthday with a small gathering in the garden, inviting a few close friends. The laughter of children filled the air as Leo played with his friends, his face lighting up with delight as he opened his presents. Maximilian watched him, his heart swelling with pride and love for his son. Anna's mother, whose health had improved significantly with the proper care she was now receiving, was able to attend, her eyes filled with joy as she watched her grandson celebrate his special day. She looked at Maximilian, her eyes filled with gratitude, and she smiled. "Thank you, Maximilian," she said softly, "for everything you've done for us. You've given us more than we could have ever hoped for." Maximilian shook his head, his eyes filled with warmth. "Your family," he said simply. "And family takes care of each other." Anna stood nearby, her eyes misting over as she watched the interaction. She had never imagined that her life would lead her here, that she would find a family, a home, and a sense of belonging. But now, as she stood in the garden, surrounded by people who loved her, she knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Emily walked over, her smile radiant as she looked at Maximilian, Leo, and Anna. She reached for Maximilian's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "This is what it's all about," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "Love, family, and moments like this." Maximilian nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "It is," he said, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." One evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Emily and Maximilian stood on the balcony, looking out over the garden. The air was cool, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, the first stars beginning to appear. They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the world around them, the peace that had settled over their lives. Maximilian turned to Emily, his eyes filled with love. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "For everything, for loving me, for standing by me, and for being the heart of our family." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over. She reached up, cupping his cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Max, and I always will, no matter what." Maximilian leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss, his heart swelling with love for the woman who had changed his life. He pulled back, his gaze locking onto hers, and he smiled. "We've come a long way," he said, "and I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Emily nodded, her heart filled with hope for the future. "Together," she whispered. As the months turned into years, the Hart family continued to grow and flourish. Leo grew into a bright and curious young boy, always eager to learn, always full of questions. Anna remained a constant presence in their lives, her relationship with Maximilian, Emily, and Leo growing stronger with each passing day. Her mother, too, found a new sense of peace and purpose, knowing that her daughter was safe, loved, and part of a family that cherished her. Maximilian, who had once believed that power and wealth were the keys to happiness, had come to realize that true fulfillment lay in the love of his family, in the moments they shared and in the connections they had built. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of his success, was now a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. One evening, as they all sat together beneath the old oak tree, watching the sun set over the garden, Leo looked up at his parents, his eyes filled with curiosity. "Daddy, will we always be a family?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. Maximilian looked at Emily, his heart swelling with love. He wrapped his arm around Leo, pulling him close, and he smiled. "Yes, little one," he said softly. "We will always be a family, no matter what." Emily nodded, her eyes misting over as she looked at her husband and her son. "Family is forever," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And we'll always be here for each other." Anna, sitting nearby, looked at her mother, then at the family that had welcomed her in, and she smiled. "We're stronger together," she said softly, "and we always will be." And as they sat there beneath the old oak tree, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Maximilian knew that they had found something truly special. They had faced challenges, they had grown, and they had built a family that was filled with love, resilience, and hope. And in that moment, he knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, as a family, ready to face whatever the future held. Years had passed since that pivotal year of transformation for the Hart family. The mansion, once a place of opulence and solitude, had become a living testament to growth, love, and the bonds that were forged through both hardship and joy. The sprawling estate, surrounded by lush gardens and towering oak trees, was now filled with the sounds of life, the laughter of children, the soft murmur of conversations, and the warmth that came from a home built on love and resilience. Leo was now 7 years old, a bright and curious boy who had inherited his father's determination and his mother's kindness. He was full of questions about the world, always seeking to learn and explore, and his boundless energy brought a sense of vitality to their home. He was the heart of the family, the one who brought them all together with his innocent curiosity and infectious laughter. Anna had also grown into her role within the Hart family. No longer the uncertain young woman who had arrived at Maximilian's doorstep, she was now a confident, compassionate presence, someone who had found her place, her purpose, and her family. She had started her own business, a small community center dedicated to helping families in need, a reflection of her own journey and the kindness that had been shown to her. Maximilian had supported her every step of the way, proud of the woman she had become. One bright summer morning, the entire family gathered in the garden for breakfast. The table was set beneath the old oak tree, which had become a symbol of their resilience, a place where they gathered to share meals, laughter, and their lives. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across the table as they sat together, enjoying the warmth of the day. Leo was busy talking about his latest adventure at school, his eyes wide with excitement as he described the science project he was working on. "We're building a model of the solar system," he exclaimed, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "And I get to be in charge of painting the planets." Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling with pride as he listened to his son. "That sounds amazing, Leo," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Maybe later we can work on it together. What do you think?" Leo's face lit up, his smile stretching from ear to ear. "Really, Daddy? You'll help me?" "Of course," Maximilian replied, reaching over to ruffle Leo's hair. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Emily watched the exchange, her heart swelling with love for her husband and their son. She reached for Maximilian's hand, intertwining her fingers with his, her eyes filled with emotion. "You're a wonderful father," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maximilian looked at her, his eyes misting over. "And you're a wonderful mother," he replied. "I couldn't do any of this without you, Emily." Anna smiled as she watched them, her heart swelling with gratitude. She looked at her mother, who was sitting beside her, a gentle smile on her face as she watched her grandson. They had come so far, through challenges, through uncertainty, through moments that had tested them to their core. But they had emerged stronger, united and filled with a love that could not be broken. Later that afternoon, Anna took a walk through the garden with her mother, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses and lavender. The sun was warm on their faces, and the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees around them. Anna looked at her mother, her heart filled with a sense of peace that she hadn't known for so many years. "Are you happy, Mom?" Anna asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. She had always wanted the best for her mother, had always wanted her to feel safe, loved, and at peace. Anna's mother looked at her, her eyes filled with warmth. She reached out, taking her daughter's hand in hers, her voice gentle. "I'm happier than I ever thought I could be, Anna," she said. "I have you. I have Leo, Emily, and Maximilian, and I've watched you grow into an incredible woman, someone who gives so much to others. I couldn't be prouder of you." Anna felt tears well up in her eyes, her heart swelling with emotion. She squeezed her mother's hand, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I couldn't have done any of this without them, without Max, without Emily. They've given us a family, a home, and I'm so grateful." Anna's mother smiled, her eyes misting over. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly. Anna nodded, her heart filled with love. "We have," she whispered. As the sun began to set that evening, the family gathered once more beneath the old oak tree. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, the air filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and the gentle rustle of the wind through the leaves. Maximilian, Emily, Leo, Anna, and Anna's mother sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Maximilian looked around at his family, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. He had spent so many years believing that his worth was tied to his success, to his wealth, to the power he wielded. But now, as he sat with the people who mattered most, he knew that true success was measured in love, in family, in the moments that took your breath away. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with emotion. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, his voice soft as he spoke. "I love you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for standing by me, for loving me, for being my partner in all of this." Emily smiled, her eyes misting over. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too, Max. And I always will." Leo, who had been sitting on the ground playing with his toy cars, looked up at his parents, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy, Daddy, can we stay out here forever?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. Maximilian chuckled, his heart swelling with love for his son. He looked at Emily, then at Leo, his smile softening. "We can stay out here for as long as you want, little one," he said gently. Anna smiled, her eyes filled with warmth as she looked at Leo. She reached for her mother's hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We're right where we're supposed to be," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Anna's mother nodded, her eyes misting over as she looked at her family. "Yes," she whispered. "We are." As the night grew darker, the stars began to twinkle in the sky, their light casting a gentle glow over the garden. The family remained beneath the old oak tree, the warmth of their love surrounding them, the bond they had built unbreakable. Maximilian looked up at the sky, his heart filled with hope for the future. He knew that life would continue to bring its challenges, that there would be moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments that tested them. But he also knew that no matter what, they would face it all together. They were a family, strong, united, and filled with love. And as he sat there beneath the old oak tree, with Emily by his side, Leo in his lap, Anna and her mother nearby, Maximilian knew that he had found his true purpose. It wasn't in wealth, power, or success. It was in the love of his family, in the quiet moments spent together, in the laughter of his son and the warmth of his wife. This was what mattered. This was what made life worth living. And as the stars continued to twinkle above, casting their gentle light over the garden, Maximilian knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the people he loved, his heart full, his spirit at peace, and his family beside him.